All right, this week's forum, we're looking at decision making, right? How do presidents go about making decisions? Um, I think in the text they start with Barack Obama's response to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2009, 2010. What does that oil spill really demonstrate about the constraints that presidents operate under? Practically speaking, what were Obama's options regarding the oil spill? Unless Congress had ceded to the executive branch considerable resources for directly doing something about the oil spill, what could he do other than, basically put pressure on the oil and gas industry and particularly on British Petroleum to clean up their mess? This is part of the challenge. This is something I talk about a lot, in terms of political science, this idea that the decisions that are made previously impact the decisions that we have going forward. Um, Another thing that I think is really important when we look at presidential decision making is that presidents are oftentimes operating under, to use a sports metaphor, they're operating under a shot clock. A lot of times decisions have to be made very quickly. And that compresses the amount of time that they have to think about and to process, what are the issues. Um, how presidents organize the White House around them is an important indicator of their decision-making processes. How wide is the staff? How much access do staff members have to the principal? I think in the text they talk about the idea of the hub and spoke organizational approach, where people are kind of organized around the president and in different relatively equal offices, and they have different levels of access. And then you have a more hierarchical approach where everything gets processed in offices, and before it gets to the president, everything's been distilled into memo form. Um, if you were president, how would what kind of organizational approach would you adopt? And what does that say about your personality and your preference in terms of making decisions? Um, I think, looking at this president, what kind of a decision maker is Donald Trump? I would suggest he's not a particularly disciplined one. I'm trying to be, a political scientist here. I'm not trying to just criticize him out of school here. But I think he is fairly impulsive. I think he is not particularly disciplined in terms of how he processes information. And I think that impacts the kinds of decisions that he reaches. Um, I think one of the interesting things to me, in the text is that the authors spend quite a bit of time talking about the obstacles that advisors have in terms of speaking truth to power. What is it about the office of the presidency that inhibits, frank advice? What is it like to walk into the White House, into the Oval Office, and say to the president something that they don't want to hear? I know you want this particular outcome, but this is not going to happen. The first thing is, your job is basically predicated on keeping this person happy. And that creates tremendous obstacles to truth telling. And it's part of the reason why presidents oftentimes end up in a bubble where they really don't, have a clear clue of what it is that's going on in the world. Another important thing to me is just how much pressure these folks are under, and how hard it is to maintain good morale. And I think a big part of that, I think one of the things that about Barack Obama, whether you liked him or disliked him, is the people around him did like him. He inspired loyalty, and those folks worked hard for him. And I wonder if our current president has that same capability of inspiring loyalty. And I would suggest that the staff turnover, the sheer volume of staff that have left, suggests something about his ability to inspire loyalty. I'll close with this idea of personality. James David Barber's famous psychological typology. Um, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this kind of a theory of personality as it affects decision making and as it affects effectiveness. What are the two dimensions that Barber talks about? He talks about the idea of a person having a lot of energy and of the person either enjoying or not enjoying the cut and thrust of politics, and that leads to the four characteristic boxes, right? The active positive is the guy that's got a lot of energy and is generally very positive and enjoys politics. The active negative is someone that is compulsive, someone that gets angry easily, someone that views obstacles as illegitimate, and are increasingly risk acceptant in terms of employing power to remove obstacles. Passive positive are people that like to be liked and like and are spend a lot of time and energy trying to get people to like them. And of course, passive negative, what the hell are they doing in politics? You wonder. They have little energy for it, they have little enjoyment of it. And yet we've had several, that probably at least partly fit that category. Let's talk a little bit about how effective this kind of theory is for really predicting, effective presidents. So I think this week, let's take a look and see what we got going on. I want to say that we have an exam this week. Am I right? Am I right? Am I right? No, we have the second writing assignment. So let's make sure we hit those marks, make sure we do a good job in our forum this week, and be prepared when you take the quiz. So let's have a great week.